Okay, thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be talking about Cynefin because it's changed. It's changed me so much, and I've grown so much from it. Um, my name is Michael. I also have a handle called Skyfield, so I go by both. Skyfield is actually the name of the land I live on, so a bit of a connection to the place that I am at right now. I've been taking various trainings from the Cynefin company and learning about applied complexity and organization design for about 5 years now. In the 20 minutes that is allotted, I can't teach everything I know. I'm not going to try, but this is a pretty snappy yet thorough intro to the framework. And I just want to say right away that why I care about this. So I pursued a career in org design after spending about 8 years in a pretty like a dumpster fire of an organization, and I really wanted to know why were things working so poorly. And after learning to apply more appropriate structures and patterns and practices as part of an org design practice that work better than ad hoc approaches, I discovered that, like, I discovered Cynefin helped me to suddenly see things I couldn't see before, see connections, see patterns, and see why certain designs work and why others fall apart. So in my experience, Cynefin is a first important step to becoming a sense-making ninja. Pronunciation, here's another a refresher. So Cynefin is the phonetic pronunciation of it. It's a Welsh word, which sort of roughly translates as the place of my multiple belongings. And it signifies the multiple intertwined factors of our environment and our experience that influence us. And this is including, how we think and interpret, make meaning, and how we act. But crucially, there are ways to that we will never fully understand. And that's just a reality of embodied existence in sort of complex environments. It's a decision support framework. It's not a method or a model. And some people may refer to it as a complexity framework. Technically, it is not. But what it does is it recognizes that sometimes things are complex. And when you recognize the difference, you can learn how to better respond and adapt. And it was invented by Dave Snowden. He's a Welsh management consultant and researcher in the field of knowledge management and applied complexity science and cognitive science. And he's also the creator of something called anthro-complexity, which is the science of complex human systems. I think it's really important to know first that, so complexity science asserts that we can never know everything about a complex system. And if we can't know everything, we still need to be able to determine what is sufficient knowledge to act in given situations, and also what information is relevant. And the powerful thing about Cynefin is that it can help us to recognize more readily what it will take to satisfy these criteria. So this is the framework. It's not a 2x2, even though it kind of looks like it has an X and Y axis. It's very simple to draw, and it has these 5 domains representing distinct ontological states based on order of systems. And it's used primarily to aid decision-making. So there's a logic to this order. I'm going to point out the clear domain, followed by the complicated domain, complex, chaotic, and then in the center, it's currently referred to as the confused or the aporetic space. And that is sort of divided into 2. One of them means that you don't know what kind of system you're looking at. And the other one is you don't know that you don't know what kind of system. That's the confused. So there's sort of 2 aspects to that, sort of an aware confusion, and that's what the word aporia actually refers to. The green stuff is called the liminal space. I'm not going to touch on that. That's the varsity level of Cynefin. But the last thing I want to point out on this particular graphic is that there's that little hook at the bottom. And that, if you imagine that this is sort of three-dimensionality to this, that's a fold in the paper to represent that the clear domain is actually at a higher elevation than the chaotic. And I'll get more into how this actually functions, but the idea is that it's very easy to fall off from the clear domain into chaos, very difficult and expensive to go the other way. Before I move on, one of the things that you'll probably hear me, a word that you'll hear me use a lot is the word constraints. And I just want to clarify that in complexity science, constraint is non-pejorative. And so what they're simply what constraints do in a system is they either create or increase or remove or decrease options for what can happen in a system. So in other words, they alter the probability landscape. An example is, imagine a playground, children's playground. Imagine it with a fence versus without a fence, like a border fence around it. And this can actually be modeled. You can see this happen like in real life. So children tend to clump in the center of a field of the playground and stay away from the edges when there are no fences. Whereas if there is a fence, this creates the conditions like safety, and children tend to play more randomly and explore more of the edges because they have that fence. So you could say the fence is a constraint, and it does limit their ability to sort of run out, off the field and into traffic, but it actually enables play. And so hopefully that sort of gives a better example of that constraint can go both ways. It limits some options, but it actually increases the probability, in this case, that the actions that you want will happen. I'm just gonna pause for a second. Have I, like, thumbs up indication? Are people with me right now? Or okay, cool. And if you, yeah, I welcome interruptions at any time. I'm not watching chat, so don't try to get in touch with me that way. I'll get my attention that way. Okay, so before we go back to the Cynefin framework, I want to just cover properties of systems, because this really helps to differentiate these three important aspects to Cynefin. So first, in ordered systems, the systems are predictable. The way things connect, they're repeatable. The whole is the sum of its parts. Whether that's clear or not, and I'll get into that differentiation in a minute. How you actually make changes or interact, the idea is control levers. So you can see where to act, you can make the action, and you can see the connection between what you do and how the system responds. They build aggregation, they're additive, they add up, or how knowledge is actually understood. It's like pieces fit together. And long foresight can be trusted in ordered systems. So a bit about complex systems and how they're different. So there are connections. The links are typically more dynamic. There may be patterns, but they're not usually stable. And importantly, if repetition happens, it is by chance. It is not because the system is stable enough that something happens once, it's going to happen again. The whole is not the sum of the parts. How you actually engage and interact with the system is through modulation, which means you could change a part, or like use the example of the fence, the children's playground. You could change the structure of the fence, and then that should impact what happens inside the fence. So that's what modulation is like, as opposed to trying to control children in that playground. Feedback. Real-time feedback is useful here. Foresight isn't very useful in complex systems because there's just too much going on, too much change. Chaos is a different thing. There are no effective links. It is the definition of randomness. They are always volatile. They are rare, particularly in nature, but chaotic systems don't last. Something will usually always happen, and often if this is an agent that is interacting, that is sort of a choice to change the chaos, stem the chaos so that it's no longer existent. So they can be useful. You know the expression, never waste a crisis, right? But their control is temporal. So if you want to actually engage and use or respond effectively to chaos, it's immediate. Time is of the essence. And when we try to manage a system that it's ordered, when we should be managing it like it's complex, this usually means you're over-constraining a system in the wrong way, and it can lead to chaos. And for me, this is just a plug of, the value of Cynefin is to really understand when things are complex and know how to behave in complexity more intelligently. Okay, so if you didn't think that was the fire hose of information, this is it. So get ready. And like I said, yeah, if you need me to go back and or explain something or give a better example, let me know. So we're going to start with the clear.
And feel a little bit flexible in time as well. Don't worry about being exactly on the 20 minutes.
Okay, cool. Good to know. I appreciate that. I'm going to have some water then. So when systems are clear, this is the domain of best practice. The constraints are fixed, like they're rigid, everything is in its place. It's obvious to the layperson. These systems can be automated. The linear, the predictable. Do not forget the high cost that it took to get there. Simple systems evolve out of less simple systems, and they are very context specific. So I give an example of, a crosswalk that is controlled by a traffic light. So who controls the traffic light? No one. It's automated because it's clear enough. Everyone knows, probably most parts of the world, if you see those white stripes across a road, most humans will know what it's for, and most people driving cars, or hopefully self-driving cars, will know what it's for, and everything happens as it's supposed to. Perfect example of a clear system. Because I said this is a decision support framework, the decision approach, so heuristic you can remember for when you recognize clear systems, is sense, as in, sense what you're looking at, categorize, everything fits in its box, and then once you've got it all figured out, respond to the situation. I'm going to move on from clear. Everyone ready? Okay. There's also a dotted line here. Now, I didn't mention this before, but so the clear and the complicated side is the ordered side. So this is where linear material causality exists. The difference between the complicated and the clear is that it may not be obvious to the layperson. So this is the domain where expertise comes in. It's where research is reliable. It's the domain of good practice, and that's important because there is some variability depending on context, and so you tend to see this is a place where experts can thrive, and my example is this is a person like a car mechanic. So a car engine is a fine example of a complicated system. So there are a lot of parts. When they are all where they need to be, functioning appropriately, motion is available to the car. And just so motion is not an emergent property of an engine. It's like it's linear, it's material, it's causal. I personally don't, besides a few maintenance things, I'm not the expert in keeping my car repaired. I trust that there's an expert that knows how to do that, and the results are usually acceptable. Good for complicated? Okay, so that's the ordered domain. And again, because Cynefin's not a complexity framework, because it's not just dealing with complexity, it's still where it shines is because it helps to recognize that sometimes things are complex, and helps. The key thing is to help to recognize where these boundaries exist. How can I be better at recognizing what kind of system I'm dealing with, so that you don't apply inappropriate ways of navigating problem solving that would be more appropriate for the for probably more ordered domains. So in complexity, practice is emergent. The constraints in these systems are going to be enabling. Think the children's playground. And the appropriate decision-making approach is to, you don't bring in with sensing, because you actually have to probe the system, because you can't understand the system by looking at it and understanding how it's going to unfold. You are actually part of the system. So you engage with the system, and by engaging with the system, you actually change the system. So this is why probing begins. So you wouldn't go in and like poke things. Like, okay, what happens? Start to understand, are things making sense? Am I seeing patterns? And that's the sensing part. And then once you start to have a bit more sense of what engaging with the system emerges from that, then you can decide what your response is going to be. I mentioned this before, and I'm going to underscore it. There is no linear cause and effect in a complex system. And if a system sort of checks the boxes for, okay, this looks like it's a complex system, it's better just to assume, okay, let's not look for cause and effect. Let's approach it a different way. And this is important because time matters, right? And I mentioned, so imagine this too, like, so the difference between the layperson and an expert look in a situation. And you might look at a situation and say, I don't know whether this is complex or whether this is complicated. And maybe I should get an expert, or maybe we should do some research. But maybe that's going down a path you can't afford because it's going to take too long. And maybe it's better to just say, okay, for all intents and purposes, this, walks and quacks like a complex system. Let's approach it as such. And that is not that actually may save you a lot of time or a lot of money. Or another thing is, if you bring a researcher, or not a researcher, an expert into dealing with a complex system, and they're going to look at it and say, oh, I know what this is because I've done this 100 times before. But no, you haven't. The context mattered. And so with their best effort and intentions, they're going to treat the system like something they've seen before when they didn't recognize it's complex. And if they fail, this ends up leading us to not trust experts, as opposed to saying there was a different way we could have taken this on. A very useful way to quickly recognize this is a complex system is when there are multiple competing yet coherent hypotheses about what is happening. And so ask a bunch of people to look at a complex problem, and you'll get a whole bunch of different answers, right? And they all make sense, but which is the right one? And if you're in a situation where you feel like you have to then pick the right one, or imagine a person who's in a position of decision-making power with a whole bunch of people trying to convince them, hey, my idea is right, we should go on this. And by the way, I want the funding to take that on. How do you decide? And the pressure of being that decision maker to say, okay, I got to pick the right choice now. Better to, and now here's how what probe, sense, respond looks like in practice, is to run parallel short cycle safe to fail experiments, which are considered probes, to probe the system. So okay, all your ideas hang together. They may contradict each other. Let's run them all. But the miniest version we can think of, the cheapest, fastest, so that, because all of them are probably right for some perspective, but they can't see the whole system. It's impossible to know. And so this way, all these probes, you're going to generate a lot more knowledge about what you're dealing with to then decide what is your strategy to maybe engage on a larger scale. Unintended consequences are guaranteed in complexity. Be accountable for them. I can't stress that enough. And this is where it comes back to the safe to fail, knowing that things are going to happen you weren't expecting. So don't like start a mega project that you may blow up in your face. I give the example of political debate. There's so many examples of complex systems, but I like this one because it helps to, like, for me, it reminds me of the multiple competing hypotheses, and my frustration with majoritarian oppositional democracy, where we end up having to pick one. Okay, that's what I have to say on complexity. On chaos, practice is always novel. I mentioned this before, but there are no effective constraints. This is randomness, and the way that you make decisions in this space is to first, once you recognize you're in chaos, act. Because what you're doing is you're trying to, in a sense, in this chaos, carve out a space that actually becomes a little complex system. So you're like forcing a constraint, or hopefully buying some time, creating some optionality, and then you can start to manage that little complex space that you created through probe, search, respond. So I mentioned acting fast. It can be used deliberately to afford novelty, and surveying is actually a form of dipping into chaos. And that's sort of tapping into the wisdom of crowds. I want to underscore this part, which is the cliff that I mentioned before. So the not recognizing the high cost to create context in which clear systems apply. Not recognizing that your best practice that works in this particular situation is actually inappropriate for the situation that you're applying it. What you're doing is you're over constraining a system that is not meant to be constrained that way, or not ready to be constrained that way. And they typically break. And when systems break and you don't want them to, it's catastrophic. It can be. They can be expensive, confusing, wasteful. And so this is the catastrophic cliff dive where you've fallen out of the clear space right into chaos, and it's total mess. You want to avoid that. I'll go through some examples now. So in the clear, so assembly line work, following a recipe. I like this one because it's also a reminder that there's an assumption that you know how to cook, right? Depending on the recipe, payroll processing, routine, rule-based, often automated. Examples in complicated, building bridge, medical diagnosis. As you can see how expertise is important in these domains because there's some variability, but also predictability if you know what you're doing. Complex, so launching a new product in new markets, organizational cultural change. Humans are complex systems, so then put humans together, and now you've got complex systems of complex systems. It's hard, especially if you are not, if you don't know how to work with complexity. Public health communications and examples of chaotic systems, so natural disasters, cybersecurity breach in real time, reputational crisis in social media. You probably heard like be the first is sort of a heuristic for how to respond there. And I'm going to finish with something that could look like a massive infinite, and this is varsity level because you can actually get into how to in a dynamic way work with Kevin. But there's three things that I want to point out as you sort of see all these lines show up. And that there's a general movement as systems evolve from complex through to complicated to clear. And it's like evolve is a good word. It's an evolutionary process. Appreciate the effort that it took to get this context especially when you're moving into the clear domain. And lastly, at all costs, recognize and avoid the doom loop. And this is just apply your best practices, things break. Oh, we didn't try hard enough. Apply your best practices, things break. Oh, we had the wrong people. Apply your best practices, things break, etc. Not fun. That's all I got.